Welcome to the Touch MBA Admissions Podcast. Do you need help figuring out which schools to apply to or how to get into the world's top MBA programs? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others on this podcast and on our site, touchmba.com, as they seek the admissions edge. And now, here's your host, Darren Joe.
Hey, welcome to the Touch MBA podcast. This is your host, Darren here. And as always, I'm here by your side as you go on this crazy journey of finding and getting into great MBA programs around the world. This week, I had Linh Gilles on the show, and Linh is the Director of MBA Admissions at the Carlson School of Management, which is based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And, this is a top 30 ranked program in the U.S. And we just had a really great conversation. Linh really opened up and shared a lot about Carlson's admissions process and what she's looking for and what you can do to give yourself an edge. And this program is also quite unique. It's a small program. There's only 100 students per cohort. And there's a real focus on experiential learning. So starting in your second semester of the first year, you would start working for companies in 4 different areas, whether that's branding and marketing, management consulting, new business ventures, or funds investments. And these are 15-month projects with real-world companies. So it's almost like having a full-time job for over a year while you're getting your MBA. So this is a great way to get experience in industries you want to get experience in before your summer internship after your year one, or of course to prepare you for your job after graduating. I hope you really enjoy this episode. And of course, as always, you can follow us here on your favorite podcasting platform, or you can get updates from us through Twitter at twitter.com/touchmba, on Facebook, facebook.com/touchmba. And if you need admissions and school guidance, go to touchmba.com and get yourself signed up. Let's get straight to the episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Touch MBA podcast. This is your host, Darren here, and I'm really excited to have our next guest on the show. Linh Gilles is the Director of Admissions and Recruiting for the full-time and part-time MBA programs at the Carlson School of Management, which is based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And she's been with the program for 7 years, and I just can't wait to learn more about this program, about what makes it unique, and of course to get the inside sort of scoop on the admissions process as well. So Linh, thank you for your time and thanks for joining the show.
Darren, thank you very much for having me.
So the first question, I get straight to the point, and that's what makes the Carlson MBA unique from the hundreds of other programs out there in the world?
It's such a great question because we truly do have a very different kind of business school and business school experience. We honestly believe that we're very unique, and especially within the types of experiences that students can gain from here, most exceptionally through our experiential learning opportunities, which we call our enterprise programs. It allows students really to have real hands-on work experience while they're in the program. So they're working alongside business partners as consultants and working with real challenges that are fee-based from these companies. So it's certainly a unique aspect of our program. The other areas as well, too, we have a very strong emphasis on a global experience within our program. We're a really small program in comparison to many other business schools, so you really do have much more of an intimate experience when you come to the Carlson School. So we really have much more of an emphasis on a unique community focus. So between these different aspects that we have, experiential learning and a strong global experience, and then just a smaller class size, I think we do offer something that's quite unique that many other business schools don't offer to their students.
Yes, and I'd love to unpack those 3 points. So in terms of your class size, it's usually about 120, 110?
About 110 is our average class size incoming each year. So again, a pretty small program.
The enterprise and experiential aspect of the program that you mentioned that is so unique. I noticed that there's 4 different areas for these types of real-world projects, right? Branding and marketing, consulting, new business ventures, and funds investments. Could you just tell us a little bit more about how long those projects last and what they entail?
Absolutely. So we have the 4 enterprises. They have their own, if you will, focus areas. So at the end of the day, regardless of the enterprise students are working within, you still get a very high touch an in-depth experiential learning opportunity. But before that, we have our brand, as you mentioned, consulting, ventures, and funds. I'll start with funds just because it is a little bit more unique compared to the other three enterprises, in that it is set up much just like an investment firm. So our students are managing multi-million-dollar portfolios, either a fixed income fund or a growth income fund. Of all the dollars that our students are managing between those two different types of portfolios, it's close to about $40 million in funds that our students are managing, which makes us actually the top three overall in the United States. But the investments coming into these funds are actually from real investors. So when you look at that aspect, it's actually the largest student managed fund in the entire world for non-endowed dollars. So very high risk, and it just creates a very unique opportunity for our students, again, to really experience the real world, and it becomes a transformative experience. Because if you're looking to enhance your career or make a transition into finance, there's nothing better than actually doing it rather than learning it only in the classroom. The brand enterprise is a little bit more of a brand and marketing strategy consultancy. So what they do then is try to help companies achieve increased profitability, competitive advantage. So they're addressing projects with strategic brand and marketing challenges, and they're really looking at it from an analytical aspect. They work with companies all over. As you can imagine, being in Minneapolis, we have a lot of Fortune 500 companies. Companies like General Mills, Target, Best Buy, 3M, and so forth. In addition to that, we also work with companies across the United States. Past projects that we have worked with would be like McDonald's, Delta, Animation. Our students right now are working on a DreamWorks project, which is very exciting for them. So it gives students broad exposure to a lot of different types of companies and industries. In terms of consulting, it's a little bit more broad, I guess you can say, in comparison to brands. Again, all of our other enterprises outside of funds is modeled after a consulting agency. So our consulting enterprise is going to be a little bit more broadly based on general management. So you may be looking at corporate finance, performance management, operations, so process improvement or process design, and they're also looking at strategies. So whether that's growth strategy or market assessment or go-to-market strategy, those are some of the areas of focus that our students will look at when they're working with these companies and their challenges. Again, a wide variety of companies as well. So the top companies here in the area, Medtronic, 3M, Polaris, Cargill, smaller organizations, St. Jude. So there's really top players in terms of company exposure that our students will get. And then ventures is a little bit more entrepreneurial or based in innovation. What we're trying to teach our students is to really think like an entrepreneur. So they may actually be working with startups or a well-established organization already, but we want them to work through real solutions to address real problems. They're holistically evaluating markets for opportunity. In this type of enterprise, as you can imagine, they deal with a little bit more ambiguity, a little bit more of a blank slate compared to when you're comparing the projects that our students in ventures will work on versus the students in brand or consulting. But there's a lot of innovation and ideation that comes out of the Ventures Enterprise experience. And of course, an opportunity to really learn strong analysis techniques.
And those projects start in year one, the fall semester, or how does that work?
Our students will start working in the enterprises their second semester of year one. So the latter half of that second semester. So their first project is actually 7 weeks long.
Got it.
And then they'll depart and do their summer internship between year 1 and 2. And when they come back, they return for both full semesters, so fall and spring. And each of their projects then will be about 14 weeks. When you think about the enterprise experience at the Carlson School, what you get is not only your internship experience that gives you real-world hands-on learning opportunities with that company that you're interning with, but then you add on 3 additional company exposures as well. So first summer week project plus the 2 remaining that you do in your second year.
And is that close to having like a full-time job in the second year? Because that's what it sounds like.
It pretty much is. These are resume-worthy experiences, and that's what makes the Carlson School so unique.
Interesting.
So students do put these consulting projects on their resume. They talk about it in their interviews, and in many ways, one of the benefits that I think a lot of companies get when they work with our school is that they get to see our students in action. So they get to see the real talent that we have here. There have been cases where a lot of our students were able to get their job offer from their enterprise experiences.
It sounds almost like an apprentice model, But that's great. I mean, I think so many people that come to Touch MBA, they want that real world experience. And of course, consulting is a big industry they would like to be a part of or work in that function. And so it sounds like this Carlson Enterprises is a great opportunity for them to develop those consulting skills, no matter what types of companies they're looking at. If we could talk about the culture at Carlson, you mentioned that there's usually around 110 students. How could you describe that so, someone listening in Vietnam or Singapore or the Middle East would be able to understand what that's all about?
We have a very specific focus. So we're intentionally small, and it creates a very intimate community that students belong to. So you really get to know your classmates very well. Not only the peers within your incoming class, but the class that are ahead of you, and then of course the students coming in behind you. It's kind of a program where you really can't hide very well in some ways. So I think what that means for a lot of students is, what type of personality do you have and how do you see yourself fitting into that type of culture? But it becomes very high touch. So our students not only know each other very well, but there's very high interaction and involvement with our faculty. There are many events that are going on at the Carlson School each day where we bring in top level speakers from a lot of different organizations. And so the exposure to those top level and executive speakers is also very high because you're not one student among hundreds of other students. You really get to have highly engaged interactions with a lot of notable people within our community. I think a lot of times when we talk about our culture, we really talk about how there are great opportunities for you to really have a presence because it is so small, but then it's also a little bit more fun because you don't have to feel so lost among so many other students as well.
And on that note, when you talk about your faculty, is Carlson particularly reputable in any academic discipline?
Oh yes, absolutely. So we have top faculty members coming in from all over, from different types of experiences and backgrounds. We're ranked by U.S. News number 4 in information systems, one particular area. However, we also have very strong industry specializations as well. So specifically here for the Carlson School, healthcare, so the medical industry is a very strong specialization that students can pursue. And we offer a menu of unique classes that allow students to take on functional leadership tracks specific to the medical industry. And that's the full spectrum of the medical industry. So whether that's from pharmaceuticals to med device, which is huge here in Minneapolis because of companies like Boston Scientific and Medtronic, but then also third-party care, so insurance, United Health Group, for instance, is here, health consulting to even patient care and delivery. So that's a huge area, but then we also have a Center for Entrepreneurship, and they also do offer a large menu of classes as well that's focused on innovation and entrepreneurship. We've had students who have successfully started their own business as a result of their experience within our MBA program, in addition to the Center for Entrepreneurship that we have here.
Well, that's great to know. It's also related to my next question, which is why an MBA in Minneapolis?
I will be very honest. I was born and raised in Minneapolis. I did also leave and live in the West Coast, so Pacific Northwest in Oregon for a few years before returning back to Minneapolis. And there is just something phenomenal and special and unique about Minneapolis. And I think part of it is that many people think that it's flyover country and there's a lot of snow, which is very true. It does get cold here in the winters, but we have just the perfect climate for somebody who is really thinking about their own career and the type of lifestyle that they want to pursue. So first, in terms of the professional landscape that exists in Minneapolis, we have 19 Fortune 500 companies that are in the Twin Cities alone. So more Fortune 500 companies per capita than any other city in the United States. So that's huge. Over 95% of all industries represented in business are also in Minneapolis. So you get the diversity of experiences. So med devices, retail, consumer packaged goods, finance, financial services, and so forth. You really do get to see the breadth and depth of these types of industries represented in one location. And what that does also for our students coming into the Carlson School is that you have broad exposure. We don't just attract one type of students, so we're not a program where we really only have just marketing students or just finance students. You really get to learn from diverse backgrounds and experiences. And then the outcomes for these students are just as diverse as their backgrounds as well. And I think that there's a lot of power in that in terms of building your own portfolio when you get exposure to these different types of perspectives. But then when you also think about living and working in Minneapolis, I think that there's something quite special about it as well, which is part of the reason why I decided to return. We have one of the highest standards of living. The culture of Minneapolis is very strong. There's pretty much anything for everybody here in terms terms of entertainment, whether it's sporting events, to high-end and fantastic, great restaurants. We have more theater seats per capita than any other city in the United States. We're consistently ranked as one of the best places to live in the United States, top cities, most educated, great place for outdoor activities. The list goes on and on. Great place to start a family. We're also ranked very high for the best places for young professionals. And again, I think that speaks to the professional landscape that we have. But it's a great city and I love it.
I'm a little biased as well, even though I've never been to Minneapolis. I've met so many great friends from that city. They happen to be living in China or Vietnam or Singapore. They love it too, and I think most of them plan to go back. If we can now focus on the admissions aspect of the program, you mentioned this small, intimate, high-touch program, this type of culture. So what are the sort of fit qualities you're looking for from applicants?
Given our smaller program size, fit is an extremely important factor in the admissions process. We have an experience, again, that not a lot of business schools can offer. So what that really means when we look for the best students to come into our program, we're trying to assess whether or not, one, can they handle the academic rigor of the program, but can they also benefit the other peers, so their classmates? Are they going to be a benefit to those students based on their experiences? So how can they contribute to that classroom and learning environment? And then also, how do they position themselves well in front of our clients and be a strong representative of the Carlson School? So we typically look for students who are highly motivated, who are self-aware. Obviously, collaboration is going to be a huge factor that we look for in students, or quality, because a lot of the work that students do in our program is going to be project-based and team-based. And really engaged, we do want students to know that part of their role as a student here at the Carlson School is just being able to show up and commit to the work that they're doing and to be an active member of our community. So those are some of the qualifications, I think, in terms of fit that we look for that goes beyond just a test score, GPA, and there's softer qualities that I think become really important because of our smaller community size. And the other thing too, even though I mentioned that, some of the specialty areas that we have that are very strong, like information systems, medical industry, entrepreneurship, those are very common things that students are attracted to the Carlson School for. But we also have strength across the standard functions that you find in business. So marketing, finance, consulting. And because we have such a strong diversity of strength in those areas as well, we look for students, again, who can add to that diversity. And there's diversity in terms of background, but then also the diversity in your experiences that we want to see showcased in your application.
When you mention some of these things you're looking for, like someone who's engaged, someone who's self-aware, someone who collaborates, someone who will be active and contribute to the class both inside and outside the classroom, how can candidates show this through your 3 essay questions and a CV and an interview? Because I think one concern they have is, I do have these qualities, but I have very limited space to express these things. Would you have any tips there for how they could show that side of themselves more?
It's very tough, and I would say that in some ways the beauty of an application process, right? Because we do look for students who can actually effectively do that. The tips that I typically give to candidates when they're applying is to really think strategically about the entire application. So I mentioned very limited real estate, and how you want to demonstrate your achievements and your experiences does not have to be exactly the same in every single aspect of your application. For instance, where candidates will oftentimes write about their accomplishments would be in their statements, their essays, and also their resumes. In terms of these accomplishments, I say that for a lot of candidates, what is important is to not be too redundant. So if it is something that I can already glean from your resume, you might want to use the personal statement as a tool to talk about something else that also features the strength that you bring to the program. There's different ways of doing that through the application process. Now, in terms of the personal statement, first and foremost, I would say that it's really important to make sure that you're addressing the questions. So for us, we are very interested in learning about what your short-term and long-term career goals are, why you're interested in MBA and why at the Carlson School, and then what you think you will bring to the program that's going to be unique as a candidate. And it's that last question where I think students can really have a lot of creative liberties. When I say creative liberty, it doesn't mean that I want them to be really funny or comedic or try to do something to make themselves stand out. And I know that's also important, but I think it's more or less, again, how do they talk about their past experiences in a way that will translate well to what we offer here at the Carlson School? So if one of the reasons why they want to come to the Carlson School is because of our enterprises, they might want to relate back an experience where they did work on a team and how they might have led that team or been successful as a team member, some of the results that they were able to drive on a project in that space in the application essay.
Can you walk us through the life of an application? What happens between the time an applicant submits and the time that applicant gets a decision from Carlson School?
Sure. So the application itself has your test scores, your transcripts, essay, resume. We ask for references, all of those components. There's also an interview component in our application process that's by invitation only. So once a candidate hits submit, we actually do a preliminary review of that application to determine whether or not the candidate should be invited to interview. And an interview doesn't automatically mean acceptance to the program, but typically it signals to the candidate that we really want to learn something more about them as a candidate. So they will get an invitation from our office, and that interview can either be completed on campus, or if a candidate's unable to come to campus, then we can also do that by Skype, which is our preference. And if not Skype, then by phone. But we really do like to see students. So where we can actually have a video component for the interview, it's going to be our preference, because I think that there's a lot that we can learn by seeing a candidate also, the presence in front of camera and so forth, that you typically don't get in a phone conversation. After the interview is done, so long as all the other components are submitted into the application, so that application is complete, the interview is typically the last part of the application. And we have 4 rounds here for application. So November 1 as round 1 application deadline, December 1 for round 2, February 1 for round 3, and then for domestic candidates only, April 1 for round 4. So within that round, we have a timeline in which we owe a decision back to candidates. Typically, it's about, I would say, 6 to 8 weeks on average, 8 weeks being roughly the maximum time frame it takes for us to send back that decision to candidates. And then from that point on, if students have additional questions about the application process, then we really invite them just to engage with the Carlson schools. We do a lot of different types of events. So this is a little bit outside of the actual admissions review process, but I think one of the more important things that students can do is just to ensure that they are a good fit for the program and we're a good fit for them. So we will have lots of invitations during the time that candidates submit their application to engage and interact with our program.
Does that include when your team is traveling around the world or just at the school?
When our team's traveling around the world, so we participate in a lot of different fairs. We have alumni in over about 95 countries worldwide, so all over the United States, again, all over the world. We also highly encourage interactions with our alumni, so whether it's coffee chats, lunches, even email communications if you have other questions about what that experience has been like for them and how they benefit from the Carlson School. We'll oftentimes facilitate those introductions at some point during the application process for a candidate.
Interesting. And who does the interviews?
Our admissions committee does the interviews. So again, point of contact with our program is quite high, so you can engage with current students, alumni, faculty, staff, enterprise directors, and so forth. But the actual interview itself is conducted by an admissions committee member. And that's admissions committee staff. Sometimes even our assistant dean may engage in that. And we also have some other staff members in our other areas of our school, such as the Career Center or Student Affairs team as well, who will sometimes help out with interviews. But it is going to be a staff member at Carlson School.
Got it. And first, can I just say that I applaud you and the Carlson School for turning around decisions within 6 to 8 weeks. I think the wait can be excruciating for a lot of candidates, so I think that's great that you guys have such a relatively quick turnaround time on decisions. But in terms of applying, do candidates have a better chance if they apply earlier, round 1 versus round 3 or round 4?
It is a competitive process, so we do tell candidates that it is better for them to apply earlier rather than later. And of course, I would say that with a little bit of a caveat, in that we also want students to be really prepared to submit their applications. So to ensure that whatever they're submitting is truly their best foot being put forward. So that means that they need a little bit more time to submit their application. Then we highly encourage them to submit it in the latter rounds, because if an application is not well prepared, it doesn't matter when you submit it, whether it's early or late, because it's the overall qualification of that application that we will be assessing. In terms of the technical way in which admissions work for us, space does become more and more limited as we move forward in the admissions process. So we are extending offers of admissions, and candidates are then accepting their offer, and as they're accepting it, our space does become a little bit more limited. and thereby our admissions process can become more competitive.
Got it. And then I have to ask you about the GMAT as well. I noticed your average GMAT score is 690. What advice would you give to candidates who say they've taken the GMAT maybe 3 times? They can't quite get to that average. Maybe they're at a 630 or 620, and they're lower on the quant section. That seems to usually be the problem. What advice would you give them to show you that they have the academic capacity to get through not only your program, but of course do the work in these enterprise experiential projects that you guys have?
At the end of the day, an average is just an average. It certainly does not mean it's a minimum score requirement to get accepted into our program. So we really do have a holistic approach to our review process. So for us, if I can break down our application process or the way that we look at an application, there are 3 primary questions or buckets, if you will, that we're trying to address and answer. Academic fit, of course, is going to be huge. So that's where the GMAT or GRE, by the way, come into consideration in the review process, along with their academic records. So the coursework, their grades, where they got it from, undergraduate, graduate, any additional certification and training. So those are usually the 2 primary components that we use to assess academic fit. Then we look for professional fit as well. So resume, personal statement, the interview will typically contribute to our understanding of their professional strength. And lastly, overall fit. And we want to see strength across all 3 of these areas. Just because a test score may be a 630 rather than our 690 average doesn't necessarily mean that that's a deficit or a disadvantage in the application process. Because again, we have a holistic review of the application, and we want to see these other qualifications that I mentioned earlier, such as the self-awareness and motivation, some of these qualifications that are so important to their success with working in teams and for working in these real projects and consulting projects that they do with companies. But when a test score is a little bit lower, and let's just say that it is indeed the quantitative section, one of the things that we will do first is look to the academic record to see if there's strength quantitatively, then if their experience is there. So that's one way where a candidate can really feel like they can mitigate a little bit of that risk if they feel that their test score is a little bit too low in a particular section. I would also say that if it's, again, using the quantitative section as an example, if they have any aspects of the work that they're currently doing that demonstrates their quantitative strength, that is something that they should focus on highlighting in their application. So driving specific results, having core responsibilities that are quantitative reflected in their resume, or addressing it in their statement is going to be another effective strategy to mitigate that risk in the application review process. And then when all else fails, we do have an optional essay that students can submit for their application. And it allows them the opportunity then to frame some of the aspects of their applications that they may think are weaknesses in their own perspective to give us as an admissions committee member a better understanding of how they will then still be successful in our program despite some of those weaknesses.
That is fantastic. So thank you so much for giving us the framework to think about that problem and how to counteract that in the various ways you said. And what about the IR section? Are you guys looking at that at all?
We are, absolutely. We have found it to be an important part of our application review process. And it's relatively new, so we are still finding our understanding of how that plays into student success once they are here into the program. So we're looking at whether or not that there is truly a correlation to stronger performers, better outcomes, whether that's for jobs or better outcomes in terms of how they work within project teams. That's yet to be fully understood, but in the application process, it does give us a good indication of critical analytical thinking capabilities. For instance, if we do have any questions on a particular candidate, we may then put a little bit more of a reliance on what is that IR score specifically, and does that add in any additional strength to the application for us to consider.
Do you have any last tips? Maybe some common misunderstandings that applicants have about the application process, or any last advice to give this admissions aspect of the program?
First, I would say that the common misconception is, again, it goes back to the test scores. So candidates, and this is true for any school, some schools do have a minimum GMAT, so of course doing the research is going to be important. For us, a lot of candidates sometimes do self-select themselves out of the admissions process, so out of applying to the Carlson School because they feel like they're incapable of meeting our standards. 690 in some respects is a relatively high average GMAT for some candidates. So many of them, while they may be interested in our program or have desires to be here, may not even apply at all. So that is the number one way to ensure that you actually don't get accepted is by not applying. So I would say please do make sure that you give yourself that opportunity. The other tip that I would give is that we do, again, have a very strong emphasis on overall fit into our program. We're looking for a student who can really contribute to the culture that's unique here and to the unique environment that we have. So doing your research on the Carlson School is going to be very important, and I think that that can be a great way to showcase your strength when you really understand what our program offers and how that aligns with what you're looking for, not only in a program, but how that will help you achieve your specific career goals. That can go a really long way in the application process. So I really encourage students to really not gloss over this aspect of understanding what our program is like, interacting with us, and learning more about our program through the lens of our students, our current students, or alumni, because I think that they can really get, in some ways, a little bit of an advantage in their application when they know more about our program.
And that's a clear sign for all of you listening. Talk to students, talk to alumni, talk to the program, talk to people of the program so you really understand what it's all about. One question I have on that though, Lynn, is the importance of fit and career, which you mentioned. How specific do candidates need to be when they apply with what they want to do after the MBA? Is it okay if they say, oh, I want to get into consulting? Or do you want to see companies and roles? How in depth would you like to see applicants research potential career opportunities post-MBA?
The more in-depth they can get, the better in some respects. So I wish we all had our own crystal ball to know exactly what we want to do when we grow up.
I'm still figuring that
and
out,
I know
by
that,
the way. So.
Yes, I ask candidates to tell me what they want to be, and yet I still sometimes question my own
Yeah.
my own future.
Yeah.
You don't know exactly what you want to do, but I think a lot of it is it demonstrates that you have been thoughtful about this process, and it's not just something that you're doing on a whim. It is a huge investment, not only financially, but also in your time. So I think that sometimes candidates think that an MBA program can be their silver bullet and it can just magically make things happen for them, but it takes a lot of grit and work. So you don't have to know perfectly what you want to do. It doesn't have to be exactly defined. But how you want to articulate that in the application process, whether it's identifying, these are some of the companies that I'm thinking of as they represent the type of culture that I'm looking for, or these are the roles that I have that I'm thinking about because I know that I have these experiences already that will be transferable. And then with the MBA degree, with what I can learn from the MBA program, this is how I can really excel in that type of role in the future. Those types of stories make a big difference in the application process. So like I said, you don't have to know exactly what you want to do from A to B, but connecting the dots a little bit for us can really give us an understanding that you are thoughtful about this process and you are very serious about what you want to accomplish and how you're going to accomplish it.
That's great. And that's just such an important business skill, not school, in general. What you're saying is to connect the dots. How do you get from point A to point B? And you're doing it, in this case, with your career and being more concrete and closer to the ground, so to speak, with knowing what your opportunities are. You don't have to have a perfect image of what that is or perfect idea of what that is, but the more common sense and the more researched your plan is, the better, I think we could say.
Yep, exactly. And I think part of it too is just that there are some goals that can be a little bit more realistic and other goals that are really far-fetched. And I'm not saying that you can't strive to, we have a lot of candidates, for instance, who want to start their own companies. There are a lot of candidates who ultimately see themselves in a C-level position. And I think that those are great ambitions and goals to have. But again, like you said, a little bit more on the ground. How do you see yourself getting there, even if it is something that is really, really competitive to attain? Just showcases a little bit more of your self-awareness. And those are some of the qualifications that we want to look for in our candidates.
Great. And in terms of financing, could you talk to us a little bit about your scholarship opportunities? Like what percentage of your class gets scholarships and what your average scholarship amounts are?
Scholarships, of course, are competitive for any program, and that's not an exception for us. I would say about 50%, maybe a little bit more than that, of our incoming students who have some type of financial reward from our program. I believe our average scholarship package here at the Carlson School is about $23,000 US dollars. So currently our tuition rate for an in-state resident is about $35,000. For non-resident, it's about $45,000. So if you look at the average, that's about a half scholarship for candidates coming in. And in terms of the scholarship process, there's no additional application that students have to submit. It really is going to be based on their strength as a candidate. So when a student gets admitted into our program, we then will automatically review their application for any scholarships that they would be eligible for. So by the time they receive their admissions packet, they will be notified whether or not they have received an award from us.
Can I assume that you're also looking at those three fits that you mentioned in terms of awarding scholarships, or is there a different criteria there?
Yes, so those three fits still apply, but there is going to be a little bit more of an emphasis on merit. So this is where test scores, academic merit, and work experience really does come into play for scholarship consideration. Because once a candidate is admitted to the program, we know that you are a very strong candidate. So now we're trying to determine the best of the best. That can be quite difficult. So it is like splitting hairs a little bit, and test scores and GPA, and again, your contributions to your work can really have a strong factor or impact on your scholarship award.
Would it be safe to say that in general, to give yourself the best chance of a scholarship at Carlson or any other top MBA program, that you should try to get a great GMAT score?
I would say that's a reality. I'll be very frank about that. For many business schools, it is a good starting point. I do want candidates to be well aware of that. And of course, the best GMAT score and how it plays out with the rest of your application. There's no perfect formula, but if financing is going to be a huge consideration for you, I will tell candidates then you really do want to put forth the effort to try to achieve the best score you can. So that again means taking as much time as you need to apply so you have the time to practice, do the prep coursework, and then achieve that ideal score for you. Do take that time rather than trying to apply earlier. That's where I would say that applying in round 2 or 3 would be better than applying in round 1 if you're not prepared.
Right. I appreciate you sharing that because I tell people who come to Touch MBA that if scholarships is really important and you want to distinguish yourself as the top 10, 20% that's going to win some sort of scholarship, you got to be top 10, 20% GMAT. I know you're looking at the whole package, but that will seriously help on a merit-based award system, right?
Yep.
In terms of careers, you mentioned that Minneapolis is stock full of Fortune 500 companies. What is the relationship between Carlson and these top companies? What unique recruiting advantages does the Carlson School have?
In terms of a unique advantage, going back to our experiential learning opportunities that we offer here, I think that does definitely give a lot of our students an advantage. Many of them are actually hitting the ground running a lot faster than many other candidates from other MBA programs because of the experience they have in our enterprises. Since our enterprise experience begins in that second semester of year 1, by the time they get into their internship, they already have a different skill level, a different level of confidence that they get to bring to those companies. So, and I know that this is not necessarily a recruiting relationship, but one of the things that students get to showcase in their internship is their own talents for companies to see. So for those companies, it's like a try before you buy. So I think that there's something very real there in terms of a competitive advantage that our students have when they have an enterprise experience like this. So that's first. And again, you're really going to connect to some of the top companies around the United States and within this region. Last year, I think we had about 58 or so leading companies hire our MBA students, and that was just in 2013 alone. School-wide, we had 104 different companies here hiring or recruiting our students. And they're assuming leadership roles at leading global enterprises. I think that that's a really phenomenal feature of our program in terms of the career opportunities. Because of where we're situated, it is not uncommon for students to be able to hear from a leading executive or a leader at a top organization in our doors, within our school, within our classrooms on a daily basis. And whether that's part of the classroom experience or even also part of our student clubs and organizations, that level of interaction with these companies is very high. So even if you don't want to stay with a company like General Mills that's in Minneapolis, let's just say you endeavor to work somewhere else in the United States or even globally, who wouldn't want to have strong level interactions and experiences with some of these leading companies within our own backyard and take it to their next company outside of our region? It's just a unique experience that you just don't always get anywhere else. And then there are some cities that just don't facilitate that as well because you just don't have access to the same number of companies that we do.
I'm starting to see that the number of big top companies in Minneapolis combined with your small class size and the high touch nature, that's a really interesting mix. And I understand because I used to work in Singapore And our school was right in the middle of the central business district. And so it was so easy for these leaders of companies to give talks and to network with our students, both undergraduate and graduate. So I can picture that in my mind. In terms of international students, I noticed that you get around 25 to 30% of your class is international. What advice would you give them? There's a lot of concern for international students, and I have a lot of international listeners, so I want to ask this question about working in the US after getting their degree, even if it's from a good school. So I'm wondering if you had any comments on that and any advice as well to give international students who would like to stay in the US after their MBA.
First piece of advice is understanding that it is certainly challenging. Because I think for any student when they come into an MBA program, obviously they are high achievers already as it is to be accepted into that MBA program. They're ambitious, they're motivated, they're likely the candidate who has excelled in pretty much every other endeavor in their life before starting B school. So it's hard then to come into an environment where you're an achiever among many other achievers, and so it does become really competitive, and that much more so when you're an international student who really wants to stay in the United States. Regardless of where you go, in terms of business schools in the United States, you face the same challenge. And the number of candidates who are looking for work authorizations, so work visas, to remain in the United States was much higher than the actual number of visas available. So that's the reality. So that does become really competitive. What's really important is just to really understand that that's the landscape that you are facing, and just to face that realistically. And what that means then for an international candidate is that you really want to start your process really early. So even at the time of application, as I mentioned before, it's really important for you to do your research and to understand a little bit more of what you want to do. That is going to be that much more important for an international student. For us, because again, we have such a small program with about 25 to 30% international students, so in a class of about 100, you're looking at about, again, another 25 to 30 international students. The real benefit and advantage there is that we can work individually and one-on-one with our international students. And indeed, we have put together specific programming within our Career Services Center that is unique just to international students and this challenge that they face. And what our international students should do then is to really be proactive in that process, seek out their career coach early on, start thinking about their stories, what their career goals are, what their past experiences have been like, and then how to bridge that gap between what they were doing before starting B school to where they want to be after B school. And it's not always about, I have to get my dream job right away. So if being in the United States is a priority, make sure that they have a couple or multiple options that would be fulfilling, but it might not always be that perfect ideal dream job that's my long-term vision. Because it's hard to go from A to Z as an international student, but you might want to think about then A to B to C to get to Z, right? We coach our students through that process and we work with them individually, and it's definitely not a cookie cutter approach. We really want to customize that process for each international student because their goals are going to be very different from the next student coming in after them. And then the other part of it is just to be a little bit self-aware. So doing that gap analysis to know what is attainable for them as well. It's hard as an international student to come from, let's say, like marketing now wanting to do private equity in the United States. And it's not to say that that's impossible. It's just that when you already face a competitive landscape, you really want to be very thoughtful about what that means for you. And then the other thing that I would say for an international student is just not to lose that motivation. It will take a lot of time and it takes a lot of work, and that's on top of everything else you have to do in an MBA program. So your coursework, balancing your own personal life with all of the other demands of the program. And for us, we're also putting our students into real project-based work. So there's a lot of things that students are doing. So you really have to have a lot of motivation and ambition to be able to be successful in this process. So being aware of that early on is going to be important as well.
If an international student comes and for whatever reason they aren't able to get that job after they graduate, how long can they stay in the US?
It's dependent on their visa. So there is a length of time and it is somewhat limited. So we do work with our students through that. At the Carlson School, we work with the International Students and Scholar Services Department or office here at the University of Minnesota. And they are very engaged in working with our international students to ensure success. So a lot of those types of questions, whether they're visas, work authorization, length of time, and then of course their own personal circumstances, whether or not they have a spouse or partners who are already here, all of those different factors will come into play, and we'll work individually with our students through that. The other thing that I should mention too is we do talk a lot about parallel job searches. So not only is there a search that students should think about in the United States, but what does it really mean to also do a search that's in their own home country or globally in other global locations? And so we kind of work all angles with our international students to ensure that they can have great success after graduation.
And what is the best way for our listeners who are interested in the Carlson MBA to contact students and alumni from the school?
Just contact our program office and we can easily facilitate that for any candidate who's interested. So we have a large number of alumni, so over 50,000, like I said, in 95 different countries worldwide, who are eagerly awaiting contact from candidates. And then even our own student population here, we have a lot of student ambassadors who really want to talk to prospective students as well. So they will likely find a very ripe group of people who are just waiting for them. So contact our program office, and then we typically will ask if there's a type of student based on function or industry or career outcome, or based on location that they want to be put in touch with, and then we'll just navigate it from there.
Great, and I'll be sure to link to that in the show notes of this podcast so our listeners can go straight there. And my last question is there anything else about the Carlson MBA that you just wish more applicants knew about or more candidates knew about?
Yeah, it's everything right now.
Everything!
How long do we have, Darren? Let me just tell you more and more about our program. No, I would just say that we're really, really unique in terms of our experience, and I think that given our smaller program size and where we're located, because not, especially for international students, there's not a lot of familiarity with Minnesota or even this Minneapolis region, and it's a hidden gem, if you will, or a really well-kept secret. For many candidates, if they do have any perceptions, and maybe that might be misperceptions of what it is like to be in Minnesota and at the Carlson School, to overcome that, and then just to get to know our program a little bit more, because I think once they start peeling back the layers, they will see a program that is extremely robust, extremely visionary, very high class, with some of the best faculty members that you can find in any business schools. And I will even compare that against the most top-ranked MBA programs across the United States, along with a program that really does care about their students and want their students to be successful, which is why we also have very strong placement rates, but also satisfaction and just a lot of success stories for our students. I think students will be hard-pressed to say that they don't want to be part of something like this from what we have here. If there's anything that I can say, because I can talk a lot about our strengths in many different aspects, I would just say that the one thing that I want students to take away is take some time just to learn more about us. Reach out to us, find out where we're going to be, if we're going to be in an international location when we're traveling, or at the very least, again, just give us a call. We're happy to talk to you anytime.
Lynn, I really enjoyed our conversation. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Oh, absolutely. I had a lot of fun talking with you, so thanks for having me. And good luck to everybody out there applying.
Thanks for listening to the Touch MBA podcast. Don't be shy. We have a mailing list. Go to touchmba.com and get yourself signed up. And we'll keep you posted with the best tips and insider interviews on how to get into your #1 school. You can also find us on Twitter and Facebook at Touch MBA. See you soon.